Let's see. Is that any better?
Damayan Prabhu, are you on?
We can hear him, Prabhu. He's clear.
Yes, Prabhuji.
Oh, now I know.
Okay.
It's my fault. It's mine. I had this on my headphones, and now I've taken off that.
Okay.
Now I can hear you. Thank you, Prabhu.
You're done.
Yeah. So nice to see you, Prabhu.
Likewise.
Yeah. So as usual, I'm going to take these off. I just came back from a program. So this off me. So Shreya Prabhu, do we have a video we're going to play prior to?
No, Prabhu.
No? Okay. So
My niece play me out. She didn't do it for me.
All right, no problem at all. Just want to be sure. So we'll just wait a few more minutes for more people to join. Is that
Sure.
okay?
Yeah. I'd like to ask a question about the general moods. It's sort of like reminiscing about Radha Damodar, but sort of kind of with emphasis on the glorification of Tamal Krishna Maharaj. Is that the basic kind of mood or theme?
Yeah, reminiscing on the pastimes of traveling Sankirtan party rather than the strength of party. And of course, incidentally also mentioning Tamal Krishna Maharaj and then whoever else that you feel like you want to. But yes, but the emphasis does not have to be on Tamal Krishna Maharaj. There's no requirement that has to be.
Okay. Okay.
You can roll it in somewhere because a lot of the disciples are on, and so they would love to hear that.
And, so we've started now. How long does each speaker generally speak for?
Shreya Prabhu, what was the answer to that question? She's the one who's.
Bhrigupati Prabhu, like he said, he'll speak for half an hour.
Okay.
Kalki Prabhu will be like 15-20 minutes. That's what he told me.
Okay.
And Maheshwar Prabhu, I think you're speaking for 20 minutes, half an hour, Prabhu, because he didn't give me a time though.
Okay. Maheshwar Prabhu is with us.
Yeah.
Well, welcome, Maheshwar Prabhu.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Okay, I had my microphone turned off. Yeah, I got the impression you wanted each one of us to speak 20 minutes to make up 1 hour, but I'll speak whatever long or short you want me to.
Okay. So would half an hour be okay, Maheshwar Prabhu?
Like I said, whatever you prefer, I'll be happy to. I try to honor whatever whenever I'm asked to speak at 10 minutes, 5 minutes, whatever it is, 30 minutes. I'll try to do whatever you ask.
Yes, and then that way, what will happen is we'll have time for more, churning the nectar, so people can ask questions and say things.
Yeah,
and,
absolutely.
Sessions before.
Absolutely.
Yes, thank you so very much, Prabhu. Thank you so very much. Kalki Prabhu looks like just joined us. Kalki Prabhu, are you with us now?
Okay. It's not coming out there. It's coming out over here.
Kalki Prabhu, can you unmute?
Okay.
Yes, wonderful. We can hear your nectarian voice now. Thank you, Prabhu. Thank you for joining.
Can you see me?
Not yet, no. We can see your name, but not.
Oh, there we go.
There you go. There's your handsome face. All right, wonderful. Excellent, Prabhu. So Shreya Mataji, you might tell me when you want me to start, but I'm just ready whenever you're ready.
Yeah, I'm ready, Prabhu. Whenever you want to start, we can go ahead.
Okay. And
because we have already few watching in the YouTube also.
Yes, please. This is on YouTube as well, and we'll actually some of us can send out that information to everybody else so that they can, because a lot of people are watching on YouTube also, and I think it's in the chat that the link has been put. So if any of you want to send those link out to anybody so they can watch on YouTube, that can happen. Just for everybody's information, this is being recorded for archive purposes. That way, in posterity, people will see these recordings and hear about the pastimes at the very beginning of this movement, this amazing movement, so that they can also have a taste of what happened when this movement first started. That's why we're recording this. And because of that also, I'm going to, as the speakers come on, I'm going to introduce you so that people know who is speaking, okay? So we'll start with Vanchakalpatarubhascha, Kripasindubhyaeva, Patitanam Pavanebhya, Vaishnavebhya. Thank you all very much for attending. So today we're going to hear from, first from His Grace Bhrigupati Prabhu, who joined ISKCON on 16th of April, 1973 at the Henry Street Temple in Brooklyn, New York. He joined Radha Damodar bus party after the Mayapur Vrindavan Festival of 1976 till year end. Then he was sent to Australia in February of 1978 and was there until 1989. And for the next 5 years was in New Zealand. Between 1994 and 1996, he was either at Prabhupada Village in North Carolina, USA, or the Soho Street Temple in London. He was serving either as temple president, vice president, or co-president in all these temples. In 1996, he moved to New Dwarka, Los Angeles, and has been there ever since, and serving as a Sankirtan leader. Thank you all so very much. Thank you, Bhrigupati Prabhu. Please enlighten us.
Hare Krishna. Well, first, thank you very much for inviting me to be part of this program. And from the different messages, WhatsApp messages I received, I got the impression that we're focusing on Radha Damodar. So I'll start with that. And as Nityananda Prabhu mentioned, I joined the Radha Damodar party in 1976 after the Mayapur festival. Prior to, Radha Damodar took a different form, a different shape at that point. Previous to that, there was one or two buses. I'm not really sure. I never really paid a lot of attention to it, but I know it was a different type of preaching program. They went to college campuses. They sat down, they did bhajans, they distributed prasadam, they distributed some books. They focused a lot on making devotees. But starting after the Mayapur festival in 1976, the Radha Damodar party or program became a transcendental military unit. At least that's the way I remember it. It expanded from as I said, one or two vehicles, or maybe there might have been a third. But anyway, at that point, we had 6 buses, Greyhound buses. And each one of them was assigned, each one of them had a leader. And each one of them was assigned a zone. And we traveled throughout that zone with about maybe between 6 and 10, 12 devotees on the bus or associated with the bus. And we did all the shopping centers. We distributed books in shopping centers, sometimes at schools, downtowns, you name it. Wherever there was people, we distributed books. And as I mentioned, it was very much in the mood of like a transcendental military unit. We would have a very strict sadhana morning program and then get dropped off at a spot. Most times it would be like some downtown area in wherever town your bus happened to be or your van happened to be. I should mention that there was 6 Greyhound buses, and each bus generally had 2 or 3 vans connected with it. So it's kind of like I think Prabhupada actually referred to it as Tamal Krishna referred to it as sort of like the guerrilla warfare. The bus would have a route. It would move from one state park to another, as it kind of traversed through its territory. And then the accompanying vans would be sent out to the towns that were kind of like in that vicinity. And the bus would have the bus leader, a cook, pujari, driver, like 3 or 4 devotees, and maybe one devotee would go out on Sankirtan with a car from the bus. And then the rest of us would be traveling in vans, and we would be dropped off in a downtown area right at the beginning of the day, like 9:30 in the morning or something like that, 10 o'clock in the morning or whatever. And then we would go shop to shop in the downtown area. And then at the end of the, after finishing that, we would hitch a ride out to the shopping center and distribute in the shopping center until we got picked up that evening, which would generally be sometime, between 7 and 9 o'clock, depending upon the place, the time of year, the schedule, like that. So, it was intense. It was austere, but it was blissful. And that was going on all over the country. The bus I was on was, the leader was Ganapati Swami. And, he's very enthusiastic, devotee, good sadhana, preacher. And one thing I remembered, just because, this is related to Tamal Krishna Maharaj. Tamal Krishna Maharaj, not right at the beginning, but someplace early along in the picture, he became in charge of both the temple on 340 West 55th Street, 8th Avenue, and all the 6 buses. 340 West 50, the Prabhupada referred to it as a skyscraper building. It went through a series of temple presidents. Rupanuga, Madhuvisa, Adikeshva, and there was more, but I can't remember all the names. But in any event, at some point, Tamal Krishna Maharaj, he was already in charge of Radha Damodar, and they approached him, and he was requested to also be in charge of that temple there. So he became like a 5-star general, so to speak, in this transcendental, Lord Chaitanya's transcendental military Sankirtan army. And so that was my relationship with him. I was just one of the enlisted men, so to speak. And Tamal Krishna Maharaj was like, at least in my way of thinking, he was sort of like next down from Prabhupada. Like one of the Prabhupada's like right-hand man, one of his commanders in chief for sure. And so there was a chain of command, and we did that, and it was quite as I said, it was austere, but it was ecstatic at the same time. I'll relate a pastime to you. I was at one point I was on a van. I was on Ganapati Maharaj's bus, but I was in a van, and our van leader was a Prabhupada disciple named Sanjaya. And we were all about the same age. We were all about the same amount of time in the movement. And so sometimes at least I found it difficult to, because to take orders from other devotees as if we were in the military, like I was a private, somebody else was the corporal, and but it generally it took that form to a certain extent. Anyway, so I kind of rebelled against that, and I wasn't particularly surrendered. But then at one point, Suradas, dearly departed guard brother, he had a run-in with Tamal Krishna Maharaj. He was in, I think it was Louisville, Kentucky, someplace in Kentucky, and Tamal Krishna Maharaj wanted him to be a temple president, either there or someplace else, and Sura wanted to continue distributing books at the airport. Anyway, there was I don't know the exact details of the whole thing, but somehow or another, it's sort of like not a punishment, but just a way to kind of redeem himself and not being willing to immediately cooperate. He was sent to the buses, which was kind of like a little bit of a demotion from being an airport distributor. And he was traveling with our bus, and he was sort of like a consultant. Sanjay was the van leader, but Sir was with us kind of as a consultant, and he was really heavy with me. So much so that at one point I actually defected from the party. I didn't show up at my spot one day when it was time to, for everybody to be picked up. And so I was kind of like AWOL. And I went to the temple in, where was it? Or Cleveland, Ohio. I went to the temple in Cleveland, Ohio, where I kind of stayed for about a week. You know, went to the airport with those devotees, and then they picked me up again. But when I got back on the party, Sir was still, you know, there, and he was really riding me. And anyway, so at one point I just decided, okay, you know, I'm not going to be able to just fub him off in any way. I have to get really serious. And so I just decided, okay, the only way he's going to ease up on me is if I just really surrender and get into it. So I did. And I remember this one weekend we were in Bluefield, West Virginia. And I just decided, okay, I got to just get out there and show these guys that, you know, I'm not a nonsense. And so I was dropped off at the mall, and we were distributing some hardback books, a lot of Back to Godhead magazines, and we had incense too. So I was giving people sticks of incense, and I was saying, here, have one of these. And they said, what is it? You know, this is 1976 in Bluefield, West Virginia. And I said, what is it? And I said, well, it's a bug chaser. I said, yeah, it's a bug chaser. It helps to keep them away. And they go, oh, okay. And then I just give them the book and ask for a donation. Anyway, somehow or another it worked. I was doing really big like that. And I had these 3 really big days, one after the other, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. And when I got back to the van each day, you know, Sura was kind of like, okay, how'd you do? And I tell him the score, and, you know, he really lighten up. And that was really, anyway, we always would reminisce about that, the bug chaser. And the anniversary, each year I'd kind of say, okay, this is the, you know, the 20th anniversary of the bug chasers, or this is the 25th anniversary of the bug chaser. And we'd have a laugh about that, you know. So I did good for a while, but then I kind of fell back into my old habits. And at one point, coming close to now to Thanksgiving, the Radha Damodara, the party rented a house in Memphis, Tennessee. And I think there was one bus was based there. I can't remember which one, but the idea was that we were all meeting there on Thanksgiving, and there was going to be like a big powwow, or, you know, just like a get together to get everybody fired up for the Prabhupada Marathon, which had just, you know, just basically kind of started up right around that time in you know, in full swing. So anyway, somehow or another, you know, going in around that period of time, I was kind of getting a bit disillusioned with being part of Radha Damodara. I kind of was becoming a little bit lackadaisical as far as my service went. And I was thinking of actually, I think I'd like to do something else. So when they had that big meeting on Thanksgiving, Tamal Krishnamurti came out for it. And as I said, at this point, he was, you know, he was in charge of the Manhattan Temple. He was in charge of all 6 buses. He had Adi Keshava under him as the temple president of 340 West 55th Street. And he had Drista Duna Maharaj, he was in charge of the 6 buses. And everybody was there. All the, you know, they were there, the bus leaders were there, everybody was there. And I kind of was used as the bad example to a certain extent in the lecture, but I deserved it. I deserved it. Anyway, that was like, you know, my first interactions with Tamal Krishna Maharaj. But anyway, I made a bit of a comeback that I got sent on a different bus, and as a cook, and I lasted about a week because I couldn't cook, and I got fired, and then I got put back in the parking lot. But somehow or another, I made a comeback, and I had a really big Prabhupada marathon. I didn't get the prize because another devotee who you know, Chandra, you know, big, yeah, Brahma, my bus leader then was Brahmadas, and he really liked him. So anyway, I think I did bigger than him, but he got some special sort of a prize anyway. But so that was it. I was on Radha Damodar up until about February of '77. And then I left and I went back to the New York Temple. But then after that, my next kind of interaction with, I'll give some, you know, since this is like organized by Tamal Krishna Maharaj's disciples, so I'd like to say a little bit more about him because I did have a bit more association. So my next association with Tamal Krishna Maharaj took a totally different, was of a totally different nature. I was in Australia, and he had gone there. He had gone there, and I believe it was like 1978. And I wasn't there at the time, but I was told about it. Maybe it was early 78. I was told about what happened. He went to Sydney, Australia, and he was, because they wanted him to be the guru, the initiating guru there. And so he was there, and he was about to give the Sunday feast lecture. He was sitting on the Vyasasan, and the deities were Gaur Gadadhar. They had Gaur Gadadhar deities made of brass, so high. So he's sitting there on the Vyasasan. I can't remember if he was chanting Jai Radha or what, getting ready to start his lecture. And some guy, some crazy guest in the audience, went onto the altar, took Gadadhar, I believe it was, and he was, had it, and he went up, had him above his head, and he started approaching Tamal Krishna Maharaj as if he was going to hit him with the Gadadhar deity. So fortunately, the devotees were on their toes. They, saw what was going on, and they grabbed the guy, and they took him outside, and they, beat him up pretty badly and everything. But when Tamal Krishna Maharaj, after seeing that, he decided, this is what I was told, that he decided, I don't know if I'm gonna, initiate here in Australia. This place might be a little bit too wild for me. So he gave it to Bhavananda, actually. And Bhavananda became initially the initiating guru there. So for some years, he didn't go there. He given that to Bhavananda, and he was initiating there. Then eventually Bhavananda had some problems, and he wasn't functioning any longer in that zone as an initiating guru. And I was married at that time. I was the person I was married to was half Chinese, half German, and she spoke Cantonese. And she really was attracted to Tamal Krishna Maharaj. I can't remember where she originally met him. It wasn't in Australia, but she met him someplace. And, he was interested in her because she looked Chinese and she spoke Cantonese, which is something. So he wanted her for the China preaching mission. And so anyway, so she was very keen to have him come to Australia. She wanted to take she was first originally initiated by Bhavananda, but then and he had some difficulties, and so she wanted to get reinitiated by Tamal Krishna Maharaj. And she pushed and she pushed, and she was actually, to be honest with you, I was on the inside of this, so I know. She pushed so much. The management there, they were kind of like a little bit reluctant to have Tamal Krishna Maharaj come there, because Tamal Krishna Maharaj was very authoritative, and when he came, he became the boss. When he came into a situation, he was the boss, and they didn't want that at that point. They were enjoying being the boss themselves, and they were doing a reasonable job. But anyway, that's what they were fearing, that he would just take over the whole scene. So, but she kind of pushed for it so much that they relented, and they said, okay, yeah, we will invite him to come and do a preaching tour. So he came, and it was such a success. He preached, and he did very nicely, and he attracted a lot of people. A lot of devotees wanted to take initiation from him. So then he started coming on a regular basis. And then from there, of course, he went on and he went to New Zealand as well. And, he acquired quite a following at that time. But so she was instrumental in that. And during that time, I remember I was, I had my wife and one son, I was renting a house. It was a big house. And I used to rent out rooms to different devotees and things. So, but when Tamal Krishna would come, because it was kind of a big place, and my former wife was a good cook, we'd host him for lunch. That was like a regular event, down in the big living room and the ground floor there. We'd host him for lunch, and it was quite of a event. Everybody would be sitting all around the room, and Tamal Krishna Maharaj would be there, and he'd be like the guest of honor. So that was, interesting kind of thing. And then when my son got to be a certain age, I was completely happy there in Sydney, Australia. But Tamal Krishnaraj told my wife that the best Gurukul was in New Zealand. You know, it had one up in Wollongbar, but it was kind of loose, and they were starting a new one in outside of Melbourne, but that was brand new, so who knows what it would be like. So he recommended that she send our son, or that our son go to the Gurukul in New Zealand. And at that time, I was Temple vice president or co-president or something like that in Sydney, Australia. So I was quite happy where I was, but guess what? You know, the powerful influence of the recommendation of the guru wound up having to pack it up, and that's how I wound up going to New Zealand. So my son could, you know, go to the Gurukul there and have his mother and father there. So I went. And then when I was there, I started off as Temple vice president there, and then the president was, you know, kind of after maybe a year or so, wanted to do something else. So I became the president there. So when I was Temple president there, by that time, a lot of the devotees there were his disciples, and the Gurukul headmaster and his wife, they were his disciples, and he had several others. I mean, maybe like another half dozen or so. And they were the, you know, influential devotees in the community. So we had a board. You know, I was a Temple president, but we had a board, and we would meet every couple of weeks or something like that. And there were men on the board and there were women on the board. And I just kind of noticed things really seemed to drag, you know, the conversation, whenever there was discussion, and I analyzed it, I thought, you know, this is dragging like this because it's the man-woman thing was figuring into it, you know, it just made it difficult to kind of really deal with things like I could with just a group of, you know, small group of men. So I thought to myself, well, you know what? Prabhupada didn't manage with women. So why do I have to manage with women? Let's, you know, get the women off the board. So I presented like a resolution, and it, you know, we discussed it and we voted the women on my instigation. We voted the women off the board. You know, worked out that one of the women that we voted off the board was the Gurukul headmaster's wife, and she was also the secretary. She was a very, you know, bright woman. Her father was a judge in Hong Kong, and she wasn't too happy about it. None of the women were too happy about it, actually. And they complained. They complained to their husbands first, and then they complained to Tamal Krishna Maharaj. And he wasn't the GBC in the zone, you know. The GBC was Prabhu Vishnu Swami and Ramai Swami, but he was, you know, very influential. He was like the senior most preacher and everything. And even though he wasn't officially the authority there, he had a lot of influence. So he decided that, well, Prabhupada doesn't know what he's doing, so we better get rid of him. And anyway, it was quite an experience, but that's what happened. So, but there was, you know, I mean, there was hard feelings at one point, but then, you know, it went away, and we became good friends. And so I kind of got kicked upstairs. They removed me as Temple president, made me a co-regional secretary. It's kind of, you know, a way to kind of get rid of an ineffective manager without humiliating him or something like that. I got promoted down or something, however you would describe it. But anyway, we remained a good relationship, and I, you know, he was always trying to get me to go to Hong Kong and China. That's because if I went, he got me, he got my wife, and he really, because she spoke Chinese and was half Chinese, he really wanted her. But I felt loyalty to that zone. You know, I was there for so many years, and I felt like, well, I'm part of the zone. I can't just pick up and, you know, go to China. But he kept after me, and so one time I promised him that, okay, I was going to the Mayapur Vrindavan festival. I said, okay, on the way to the festival, I will go to Hong Kong. I'll go to Hong Kong first, and I'll, you know, check it out and see what, you know, see what scope is for maybe spending some time there and preaching, getting involved. So I botched it up. I left it too late. And as I waited too long to apply for the visa, so by the time I applied for the visa, it wasn't enough time to get it before going to India. So when he was expecting me, you know, he was there, and when I got to India, he was also there, and so, well, what happened? You know, I said, I explained to him, he wasn't too happy about that. So it worked out that that year at the festival, the GBC decided that book distribution in North America needed to be revitalized. It had been kind of fallen by the wayside. And I don't know if he volunteered or I think they directed that Tamal Krishnaraj and Radha Damodara should both do something to revitalize book distribution in North America. This is about like 1993, 94, 93, I think. Yeah, 93, 94. So, so I took that as an opportunity. I said, okay, look, I'm going to make it up to you. I'll come to Dallas and I'll help you with that. I'll help you kind of try to get the book distribution up and running again. So he felt he was okay with that. And so I went there, I guess it was 93, and it was coming into the marathon. It was probably, I was there October, November, and then December rolled around, and I was supposed to go back to New Zealand because I was supposed to, I was actually the minister for book distribution in that Australasian zone. So I was supposed to go back there and kind of try to help get the marathon happening there. But somehow or another, Tamal Krishnaraj convinced me to stay in Dallas. And that was interesting because they weren't too happy with me in Australia and New Zealand for that, but I did it. I stayed there. And during that time, one thing that I remember was, I found it interesting. When I got there, nobody knew who I was initially. And I just was like, I wasn't treated rudely or anything like that, but I was very much just like, okay, you're here, great, wonderful, here, get in line like everybody else. But then one day, I think the temple president was at that time was Yudhishthir, and the word got out somehow that I was an invited guest of Tamal Krishnaraj. So from like pretty much from one moment practically to the next, I went from being like just another person in the temple to being like a VIP. And it just really impressed me about the influence of Tamal Krishnaraj. That as soon as devotees found out that, oh, this is an invited guest of Tamal Krishnaraj, and everything was like really changed. I mean, there's that expression, it's not what you know, it's who you know. I really got a little bit of realization about that at that time. And another kind of unusual thing that happened was because I was staying up in the quarters, in his quarters there with his servant, Radha Krishna. So at that time, I was a big fan of this book written by Sariputta called Alien Identities. There's a book about like a Krishna conscious perspective on the UFO phenomena. And I remember I'd read it more than once myself. I really liked it a lot. And I gave a copy to Tamal Krishnaraj as a gift. And I told him, hey, you got to read this. It's really good. It's very Krishna conscious, and it was. And so he was reading it. And I remember after about a week or so, he was mentioning to me that he was having nightmares. And I said, and he mentioned it more than once, I said, and then after a couple of days, I said to him, I said, hey, just out of curiosity, are you reading that book in the nighttime before you go to sleep? And he said, well, yeah, as a matter of fact, I am. I said, oh. And he immediately stopped reading it. That was the end of that. But that was kind of, funny. But yeah, then, but just in general, he was, Tamal Krishnaraj, when I think back upon him, I always remember him as I said, like the general. He was Prabhupada's right-hand man, like definitely one of the commanders in chief of the Krishna consciousness movement, and a great leader. And he really accomplished tremendous things. I mean, Radha Damodara, that's his baby basically, and he did amazing things for that temple in New York. If he would have, stayed very involved with that, they probably wouldn't have had that as much, the problems managing it that they did, and wound up giving it up. And I guess the thing that impresses me most about Tamal Krishnaraj is the very powerful impact he's had on his disciples to this very day. I mean, it's been at least, how many years has it been? I don't know. I've lost track how many years it's been since he passed away, since he departed.
21 years now.
Wow, 21 years. So, but still, even, after 21 years, he's got still such a dedicated following of a group of disciples that are still, as inspired by him as it seems like they have the same sort of mood towards him as disciples of Srila Prabhupada have towards Srila Prabhupada. And I don't think it's artificial. I think it's, very genuine. And so that, kind of is a testimony to the spiritual impact that he had on the lives of, devotees who were very, serious devotees in Krishna consciousness. So, yeah, I don't know how long I've been speaking for.
Thank you, Prabhu. Yeah, you've come to your 30 minutes. A little over that. Thank you so very much. Prabhu, we'll have you stay on because people will
I'm gonna be here.
Questions and speak things after the others have spoken. But thank you so very much, Prabhu. And the next speaker is His Grace Kalki Prabhu, who joined in the spring of 1974, Vancouver, British Columbia in Canada, and was initiated in summer the same year. Later, he moved to Chicago and joined the BBT party in 1975. Then joined the Radha Damodar bus party with the merging of BBT and Radha Damodar parties, which soon became Radha Damodar Traveling Sankirtan Party. He was a bus party leader for some time, taking over His Holiness Tripurari Swami's bus, then traveled with His Holiness Bhakti Tirtha Swami and His Grace Durlabha Darshana Prabhu, doing contract sales. Soon he moved to Houston Temple for a couple of years. Later, he was the Sankirtan party leader in Manhattan Temple for some time, before going to Chicago Temple, and was temple president in the early 80s and got married to Her Grace Kanta Devi Prabhu, Kanta Devi Dasi. During the 80s and 90s, traveled to Calgary, Canada, and then to Sharanagati, mid-90s, before returning to Chicago in 2001. Currently, he is in Alachua. Kalki Prabhu, please enlighten us.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Glories to Prabhupada.
Right.
Shri Shri Damodar. Vaikanath Swami Maharaj. So my first real contact with Radha Damodar was as a bhakta in Vancouver. Vishnu John Maharaj came there, traveling with Hasyagrami and I think Radha Raman Prabhus. They were doing Sankirtan, going to the Canadian equivalent of a state fair. They had a little booth. So we went with them, Ganapati Maharaj, who was not a Swami at the time, and a few other Vancouver devotees. We went with them and spent a week with them while they worked the fair. Inside, we were doing book distribution outside. Then he left. And at one point, Ganapati and Kripanidhi and myself we were on traveling Sankirtan that summer, and we went to New Vrindavan for Janmashtami. And of course, Vishnu John Maharaj and Tamal Krishna Maharaj, Radha Damodar, they were all there in New Vrindavan. So we spent that time there, going to the morning program in the barn in a hayloft somewhere there in New Vrindavan by the old small house they had as a temple at that time. Taking showers in there was a big pit with a big hose that shot out this big stream of water. And it was like a pond that you would just kind of go there and shower up first thing in the morning in this big mud pond. But so then I had to drive Kripanidhi, and I left. Ganapati Maharaj met with Tripurari Maharaj, and he ended up staying there again. He was with the BBT party, him and Rita, and they were in San Diego, but they got deported for selling books undercover in the airport. So they came to Canada, and then that's how I hooked up with Ganapati Maharaj. he took me there. He met with Tripura Mirage. He stayed there, and then I had to go back to Vancouver with Creep and Edie, drive our car back there. And I got initiated there on Radhastomi, the installation of Radha Madan Mohan in Vancouver. Then a while later, I went back to Chicago to get further trained up in distributing hardbound books. And then after about a couple of months there with that party, which was headed up by Tripurari Maharaj, and, you know, all the famous book distributors were there. Ganapati Maharaj was there, and Suradas and Pragosh and Vaish, and, you know, the whole big list, Manasuda. It was a really intense program. And so, I had gone there with the intention of spending time there and then going back to Vancouver. So after a couple of months, I went to Tripura Maharaj and I go, so what's going on? When am I supposed to go back to Vancouver? And he goes, oh, no, I talked to Baudak. Baudak said, forget it. You're just going to stay here. Then a few weeks later, Uda Mashloka, who was the president at the time, calls me off and he says, Kulki, what's going on, man? You're supposed to be going back to Vancouver. Baudak hasn't heard from you for a couple of months. How come you're not calling him up? What's going on? I said, well, I talked to Tripura Maharaj. She said that Baudak wanted me to stay here. But anyway, I said, forget it. I'm not going back, because I knew they would just want me to go out and do incense and stuff. And I said, forget it. So I stayed there in Chicago. And at that time, they were just opening all the different airports. So we would go to different airports. That was kind of the job of the BBT party, to go to different airports and, help the devotees there set up their program at the airport. And we had a whole program that had been designed for going out, reading, selling books, coming back. It was a whole sadhana program as well as going out on book distribution. And so I went to Cleveland Hopkins for a while there with Divyanga and Jiva Goswami. Then Tripurari Maharaj, she wanted a brahmachari assistant to travel with him. So I did that. And we traveled all over the place in different temples where the airports were being opened up and legalized. It was a really big thing happening then, all the different airports. New Orleans, went to Puerto Rico for a while. And then, as Brigupati Prabhu said, I guess it was 76, when they came back from India, from Mayapur festival, there was a merger of Radha Damodar and the BBT party. And then a lot of the biggest distributors for Radha Damodar started going to the airports, like Dhruva Maharaj. I remember he was going, and Sanjaya, and, a bunch of devotees started working at the airport. And Suradas and I, and Gyapika came with us. He was taking, I had Chodagore, because that was kind of something that I did when I traveled with Tripurari Maharaj, was help him take care of Chodagorni Thai. So we were traveling, so I just took Tripurari Maharaj's deities with us, and Gyapika was taking care of him, actually. And Surdas and I went around to the different temples that were being established. I know, let's see, actually, before we got to that part, Tripurari Maharaj was going to get a bus. It was being built in Harrisburg. And so we traveled with Radha Damodar for a while. Went down to New Orleans and came over to Florida. And that's when Drishtadyumna Maharaj, He had a van and an Airstream trailer. And we were going from New Orleans to Florida, driving down the freeway. And Ramacharya was bathing Radha Damodar, and I was bathing Chodagorni Thai on the bus. And all of a sudden, Dada hits the emergency. He was driving the bus. He hits the emergency brake, locks all four wheels. We all go flying off the altar. I'm laying on the floor holding Gorni Thai. Ramacharya is laying over in the corner, water everywhere because we were in the middle of bathing the deities. And I get up and I look out the window, and there's a van upside down with the wheels spinning, steam coming off, and this Airstream trailer had just cracked in half, and everything was just spread all over. And I go, it's a mess in here. Have a look out there. And amazingly enough, nobody got hurt. It was just the Dumna Maharaj, and trying to remember who was driving the van. And it was just the Dumna Maharaj was reaching over to get a map or something, and he kind of nodded out, and he hit the driver's arm, and it started fishtailing, and then it just flipped over in the middle of the freeway. It was actually in between, the east and west roads. So anyway, that was one event. Then after that, I think we made our way back up to Harrisburg, and Tripura Maharaj got his bus, and we traveled around, went out we were kind of in the southeast Kentucky and those kind of places. Made a few bhaktas. We drove out to California, LA, went up to San Francisco, came back. Mostly our focus was on book distribution more than festival programs, really. I think Maharaj might have went out sometimes on festivals, but then after some time, he started doing other stuff. I kind of took over his bus for a while, and we traveled around doing that until the buses discontinued and devotees started opening temples. Vaikanath Maharaj, where did you go after your bus? Is that when you went to Houston?
Can you hear me now? I was muted.
Yeah.
All right. After the first time I left a bus, our bus went to St. Louis when we took over that temple. And I was there for some time, and we had an airport party too, because that was a very big airport.
Yeah.
Then
Yeah, I came to St. Louis because when we stopped our bus, I came to St. Louis and worked at the airport also at that time.
right. So our bus was there, and then I remember you were there as well. And
Yeah.
I was out with Mahamuni somewhere, and we came back, and you and Tripurari were in the office, and that's when we heard the news. And
Right.
so a couple of days later, I went to India. I was so freaked out, and I got there just in time for the closing ceremonies in Vrindavan, and then went to Calcutta, and then stayed, I think I doing a thing with what is it, with the Gita Nagari and all, and the buses were breaking up. And
Yeah.
then I went back to India with Kumal Krishna Goswami, and I was there in Bombay from, actually he called me back. I was about to go on traveling Sankirtan in India from Bombay, and we had the van all warmed up and ready to go. It was right after Mangalarti. And I was walking out the door, and the guy at front desk said, "Oh, your phone call." I said, "I don't care. I'm going on travel with Sankirtan." And he said, "It's Paul Krishna Goswami." And I went, "Oh." So I talked to him, and he said, you should come back to America right away. I said, well, but I'm about to go travel around India. No, come back right away. It's great here. Chip Maharaj is here. Everybody's there. It's a really nice place. I'll give you a bus. So I said, okay, I'll come back for that. Got back, got sent to Houston. Because Lakshmi Ryan couldn't do it anymore. And so we went there. And it was a kind of a rundown place, that little shoebox. But we had this Pashupati and we started fixing it up. And you came there.
Yeah.
And Shankar
Pandit.
Shankar Pandit, Atendria. I mean, we had so many great guys there. Anyway,
Pyari Mohan was there. Durasaya was there.
Yeah.
Kasi Ram was there.
He was there sometime. We got different visitors. Nikatma came through. Kasi Ram wasn't there a long time, but yeah. So that's.
I'll never. I got to tell this. One day I came back from Sankirtan, right? And I goes into the office. You know what I'm going to say? So Maharaj goes, "Hey, Koki, do you know anything about snakes?"
Oh.
I goes, "Not really." And he goes, "Well, have a look at this. Somebody sent us an envelope full of snake eggs, and we can't tell if they're rattlesnake eggs or not." So I go over and I open this thing up and so we closed it all up. And then Kashi Ram comes walking in.
And we did it was a rubber band between a paper clip and you turn a button inside. And when you lift up the envelope inside, it goes sounding like a rattlesnake and goes.
So Kashi Ram comes in and Vaikanath Maharaj goes, "Hey, come on over here, Kashi Ram. We got this letter. This girl sent, she said it was rattlesnake eggs. And, you know," he goes, "Yeah, let me see that. I can tell you what that." He opens this thing up and he jumps back, falls over the sofa. He's laying on the floor. We were cracking up because he was always the tough guy, right?
Right. I think Sura was there too. I seem to remember him. He might have been visiting. I don't remember. But yeah, we got a lot of people. We were calling him in. Yeah.
That temple was, we had a lot of fun at that temple.
We did.
Everybody was really in good spirits. We were doing a lot of Sankirtan, a lot of great kirtans. Adani Ashwabhava was there. Bhubaneswar was the cook.
Yeah.
It was pretty sweet. So I don't want to take up too much time. So I ended up back in St. Louis. And that's when Suradas and I took off in this van with Gyapika. We went up to, I think it was Madison, Wisconsin, and Gopi Janaballabha Prabhu was there. And what we were responsible for was to go out with the bus party devotees who were selling packs of incense and BTGs and get them off the pack and do sticks and selling Bhagavad Gitas, hardbound books. So we went, him and I and Gyapika, we went to Madison, we went to Kansas City, Keshava Bharti was there. We went to Memphis, Brahma was there in Memphis, and Kavi Chandra was in Louisville. Oh yeah, another anecdote on that Rock Street Temple in Memphis for that festival there, Brigupati. I don't know if anybody else who was there remembers, but at that festival, the kirtans were so intense, we blew the floor out in the back of the temple room. You remember that? And it became like a springboard back there. We had 70 or 80 devotees in there having kirtan bouncing up and down. We broke the floor joist in the back. Atendri was sleeping up in the attic. And in the middle of the night, he rolled off and went right through the drywall ceiling and landed in the middle of the temple room on the devotees sleeping on the floor. And yeah, we blew that place right out. Then we moved out of that place. But so then St. Louis, Magendra, we started doing, the devotees in Berkeley started doing contract sales. And we would go to, we would make appointments. What had happened was we got in the mailing list for some psychic magazine, you know, UFOs and all that kind of stuff. So, and we would also go other places like Unity Church, and we had a survey we would do with people, you know, about different things on the pretext that we were the research group for greater awareness. And we'd make an appointment to go to their house, do a survey, and then they would qualify, of course, to do a trial on this set of books that we had for people to read and give us some feedback. All they had to do was pay for the shipping of the book, which was like $5 a book, which is what we were selling the books for. But anyways, that was our whole program. So Durlaba Darshan, we would get, he had the mailing list, and we would get names from different events we would go to and interview people. And then he would call them up and book appointments for us. And then Bhakti Tirtha Swami and I would go and meet these people and give them our whole rap and stuff. And, you know, these people were into psychic phenomena, UFOs, and like, I was with Tripurari Maharaj when he did it one time, and Bhakti Tirtha, who was Ganesham Prabhu at the time. We were, we went as two people, and we'd take turns who would like talk to the person. So they're sitting there talking to the person, and they're trying to close the deal, right? And these guys were way into psychic phenomena and stuff. So, like, for example, Tripurari Maharaj is talking to this lady, and every time he tries to pin her down about, you know, getting the set and, you know, paying for the shipping, she was let me go check in the kitchen. I got to see what I'm doing in there. So she gets up and goes out of the room, and he goes, take your wig off. You know, we peel our wig off, and she comes walking back in and looks at us, you know, and he starts looking at her. All right, well, Mabel, I'll have to let you know we've come from higher places to bring you this knowledge. And he goes into this whole thing with her. And Bhakti Tirtha Swami had the same rap too that he did to a couple of people. And they took the books. But so we did that. We traveled everywhere. We started in Chicago, and we went to St. Louis, and, you know, we went to all these places, Louisville and Memphis, Dallas, Houston, and then we went to LA, and it ended there. And that's a whole nother story, but for another time. But so anyway, that's when I came from there. I went to Houston. And Vaikanath Swami, who was Janardhan Prabhu at the time, was the temple president. And I was there for a couple of years doing Sankirtan, out at the airport with Shankar Pandit. People like Dharma Pran came with his wife and a couple Madhijis he brought from Chicago to work the airport. And it was pretty fired up. We had a great time there. That was a highlight for me, those 2 years in Houston. And actually, when we went to Dallas, Bhakti Tirtha Swami and Durlaba Darshan and we got there, and there was a big semi-trailer truck pulled up to the front door. And we go walking in, and they're like loading everything into this truck. All the desks, all the chairs, anything that could move, they were loading into it. We're like, what's going on? Oh, yeah, well, Tamal Krishna Maharaj is taking over this zone, and Sat Spruit Maharaj is moving to Gita Nagari. So we're taking everything with us. I'm like, you're taking everything with you? Okay. They like drove out with a truckload of everything that could be carried out. But yeah, I guess that's about it. You know, there's all the time frames and stuff. There are so many different things happening. They're kind of mixed up for me, but that was basically, you know, my sojourn with Radha Damodar. After the Houston temple broke up, I went to New York and was a Sankirtan leader for a while there. And then I went back to Chicago. And that was pretty much it for my traveling days.
Thank you.
But Radha Damodar ki jai.
Thank you very much.
Hare Krishna.
It was so nice. Very good. Thank you so very much. All of you who are speaking are bringing back for us great encouragement, seeing where we are today and what you had to go through at that time to preach and reach out to people compared to the, you know, the relative calm and opulence that we have today. And, you know, it's just amazing. Thank you very much. Really appreciate everything you said.
You know, one thing I will say is that the camaraderie that we all had was really something.
Mm.
You know, we underwent a lot of, you know, it's hard to even say sacrifice because it was spiritually, it was a sacrifice, but it was really so ecstatic.
Nice.
To do what we were doing. It was very intense, but very blissful at the same time. And everybody sacrificed so much, but it wasn't all that hard, really. I mean, other than dealing with your own mind, but all the, you know, the friendships and everything that everybody had and the close association that you had.
Yes.
You know, you never had any experience like that.
Mm.
Outside of being a devotee.
Nice. Thank you, Guru. Thank you so very much. So His Grace Maheshwara Prabhu first began studying philosophy of Krishna consciousness in 1973. In October 1975, he joined the Radha Damodar traveling Sankirtan party after he dropped out from the University of Kansas. In March 1976, he was initiated by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada. During his service as a devotee, he was involved in many ISKCON projects like temple construction, building Ratha Yatra carts, designing restaurant, planning and construction of Srila Prabhupada's Samadhi Mandir in Vrindavan, India, and also visualized the original Mayapur Lotus Fountain Garden. In 1981, he spent 5 years in Los Angeles, assisting His Grace Amarendra Das, Amarendra Prabhu, as a paralegal for the BBT legal office. In 1984, he began Jagannath Enterprises and started a Namahatta Bhakti Vriksha preaching program. He engages in several public outreach events and preaching programs. Thank you so very much, Maheshwara Prabhu. Please enlighten us.
Thank you for this opportunity. Let me begin by saying Om Jnanatam Randasya Gananjana Salakaya Chakshun Militanyena Tajma Shri Gurave Namaha Vanchakalpatru Vistra Kritasindhavyeva Chapatitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. So actually Radha Damodar had a very monumental impact on my life, and to help other people really understand just how much of an impact it was, I have to spend a minute here, just give me a little bit of background. I was raised Presbyterian in New York and went to school at the University of Kansas, and I was told that I was not going to be done with my education until I graduated. I was studying industrial design and was bored silly going to the, they took us to field trips out to the Cessna Aircraft Company, which is in Wichita. And I saw my future and I was like, oh my gosh, I don't want to do this. I didn't really know what I wanted to do. So I took off 2 years and I went to Europe. And I kind of knew that what I was looking for was something I had to resolve within myself, but I also knew that I had to find, I knew if I changed the environment, something might happen. So I dropped out of college after 2 years, went to Europe and actually ran into the devotees in Paris, France, doing Sankirtan. And because we were just wandering around, I went with 2 high school buddies of mine and they gave us one of these invitations to the temple, the feast, the Sunday feast. It was sort of my first introduction to what we would say is the maybe not so organized Hare Krishna movement, because they gave us this address and we went to the temple and it was raining a little bit and we really didn't have anything to do and we really wanted to go in, but there was no sign on the door and it was starting to get a little bit too wet and we were about ready to leave. And just as we left, the devotees drove up and said, oh yeah, you're at the right door. We were actually standing on the front steps of the temple in France and was just close away from walking away. So eventually we attended that program. There's all sorts of interesting stories there. And when we left, I had already read one version of the Bhagavad Gita in my personal growth, my own personal growth process. I was very disappointed with it and mentioned that to the devotees as I was walking out. And they had told me at the time, the Macmillan BBT had, Bhagavad Gita had just come out. And they made it clear to me, they said, you read the wrong one. And somehow I heard that and I understood it. But I wasn't going to carry this huge, what looked to me like a brick in the back of my backpack. I mean, my spiritual book at the time was a little Gideon's Bible, which was about the size of a pack of cigarettes. And I was not going to take that book with me. So but I did promise I'd get it when I got home. And by strange mystical arrangements, a whole lot of side stories here I'm going to leave out. I did go back to school my 3rd year in the University of Kansas, picked it up. And because it was printed by Macmillan, it was actually in the University of Kansas school bookstore. And there was just one copy there. Now, this is actually pretty remarkable because there were no temples anywhere near Kansas, Lawrence, Kansas at the time. Now there's a temple in Kansas City, but at the time, the closest temples were Chicago, Denver, Dallas, and St. Louis, and they're all about 300 miles from Lawrence. So Krishna placed that there for me. I read it, and then the next 6 months or so, I read the entire Bhagavad Gita and was just completely blown away. Which then raised me to the next problem, which was another couple months went by, and I found myself in my senior year. And I was already on to reading the Srimad Bhagavatam, and I was just miserable because I knew I was in the wrong place and I had no idea, and I wasn't, secure enough and brave enough or whatever to just drop out and go visit a temple. So I was really earnestly praying to Krishna somehow or another, I want to be a devotee. I knew if I did not do something drastic, I'd probably miss out. I knew that Prabhupada wasn't going to live forever, and I really wanted to be his disciple. And so I was just really in this sort of very frustrated state of mind. And then the next thing you know, I get a knock on my doorbell, and it was Budara, who was the lead on the Dristadumya and Sudama's bus party. And they were coming down from Chicago, the big reunion in Chicago that many have talked about. And they were going to turn, west from St. Louis. They met the devotees in St. Louis. I had visited them the year before. Mukunlal and Pranandas were there. Somehow they kept my address and my telephone number. And they told them, go look up this guy at the University of Kansas. They knocked on the door and my prayers are answered. Budara was basically the first one bringing a whole busload of about 15 other devotees to the University of Kansas. And even at the time, I wasn't really sure what I was doing. All I knew is I wanted to help them. So I kind of cut classes, set up lectures at the university, even did a television show with Dristadumya Swami. There wasn't a Swami at the time, but Dristadumya with Professor Alfonso Verdu, who I still remember, on Asian studies. And by the end of the week, I had done so many things with the Radha Damodar party and just felt so obliged to help and give them whatever they needed that as Friday afternoon came, they were going to spend a week and then they were going to move on. And they made it clear they were going to leave. And they looked at me and they said, you know, what are you going to do? And I actually talked about a little bit about this on my other presentation, but it really got down to, you know, you give us everything you own, but you haven't given us you. And that's kind of what it got down to. And I couldn't say no. I just couldn't say no. So they said, you know, I had long hair. They cut my hair. They put me on the bus. We spent another 3 or 4 days packing everything I owned, shipping it back to whoever I thought might best benefit from it. Completely freaked my parents out because they had no idea that I just dropped out of college. And what made it even worse was that I actually wrote them a letter, being the responsible guy that I like to think of myself as being. But I was in such a state of mental turmoil, I didn't address it to my parents' house in New York. I addressed it where, in other words, what I did is I put the address that should have gone on to my parents. I put that in the return address. And I put the address for the Radha Damodar head office, which at the time was in Florida, to the addressee. So it went to Keshav Bharti and Rajendranath down in Florida. And they're wondering, why do we get this weird letter from this guy that just joined Radha Damodar at the University of Kansas? And they just let it sit there. And so I joined Radha Damodar. Somebody said last week when I was listening that not many people directly joined Radha Damodar. I was one of those rare people. And so I wrote that letter, but and I did that on October, I believe it was October 10th, 1975, I think it was. I assumed my parents got the letter. Of course, they didn't. And it wasn't until about 3 or 4 months later when I finally got to LA, I got on the bus, shaved my head, joined the whole party, agreed, took on the task of doing Sankirtan, not because I particularly wanted to, but I just felt a real obligation. Somebody had said something about it was, I think it was Brigapati was saying how it was kind of a military environment. I've always referred to as Radha Damodar as the ISKCON Marine Corps. It's just was very, very, every minute you were on, you were doing it, you were going forward. And so anyhow, I finally called my parents when I got back to New York, which was literally 3 or 4 months later, finally feeling comfortable enough to be able to talk to them. And my mother practically, she had a heart attack because she finally talked to me after 3 months and was happy to know that I was still alive. And there's all sorts of very interesting stories that are in there too. So anyhow, when I had joined Radha Damodar, Trista Dumi was there with Sudama Swami, and I kind of made it very, I was going to do it anyway. I figured I might as well bargain for what I could. And I said, if I'm going to join Radha Damodar, fine, I'll do that. I'm going to drop out of college, but I want to go to India. And I want it understood now that I'm going to go to India. So they all agreed to it. But Tamal Krishna Maharaj, I got along actually pretty good with him. But he could see pretty quickly that I knew how to get things done. And I really leveraged that big time. So when we eventually ended up back at the New York temple just before we went to the 1976 big initiation, where I got my first initiation in Vrindavan, in the Vrindavan courtyard. I had made it clear that I wanted to stay in India, but they pulled me back and they took me back to the United States again. And Trados came down, and it was basically, what was I going to do with the New York Temple? We had just purchased the 55th Street New York Temple. And for those of us who are familiar with that, it was a huge building and it had a million things that needed to be done to it. And I felt I could be much more valuable doing things there than going out doing Sankirtan, which I didn't really have much of an affinity for. I was okay at it, but I just didn't feel like it was the right place for me to be. And Tamal picked up on it. So when Trados came down and said, okay, you're going to go on this party or that party, I said, yeah, I don't think so. And I leveraged it with Tamal Krishna Maharaj, who was very, very, who immediately started engaging me. And one of the things he engaged me in was to actually build the New York Radha Govinda deities. We actually made a sort of a false facade, or like I should say a duplicate facade of the Govindaji temple in Vrindavan, which was a whole interesting thing in itself, because we had all sorts of very interesting, talented artists doing all this sculpture work, but nobody knew how anything was going to fit together. So Tamal Krishna Maharaj asked me to work on that. And that's when I really started bonding with him. And we finally did get it's really sad. There's a whole long sad story about what happened in New York. I mean, there was a lot of wonderful things too, but it's just too bad what happened. But in any case, we built a whole facade, and just prior to Prabhupada coming for the big, huge 1976 Rath Yatra Festival, which he had envisioned 10 years early in 1965 or 66, there's stories about how he envisioned having a parade down Fifth Avenue. Of course, he didn't have any disciples. He didn't really have much of anything at the time. But then literally 10 years later, we did it. And it was an extraordinary event. But I was pulled off the construction of the temple facade in the temple room 3 days prior to the parade to go down and help, because Jayananda was working very quickly and he was doing a great job. They had started that project. They had started building the Roth carts in January that year in the old New York bindery, which was part of the whole Henry Street complex, I guess, at the time, or it was somehow tied together. And Jayananda was a little nervous that he wasn't going to get it done. And there's a whole big thing that happened the night before the parade, Saturday night before the parade. I went down, I was bonding very nicely with Jayananda also. He was happy to see us come down and help him out. And then right as the Roth cart was going up, for the first time, Balaram's Roth cart was going up with the idea that it was going to go out on parade route the next morning, you know, at 9 o'clock in the morning when the parade started. And as we were putting the Roth cart top up, a big gust of wind came down the Hudson River, right over the top of the train station, and just threw the whole thing on the ground and smashed it to pieces. And it was a huge emotional moment for all of us. And I actually have a whole separate talk. I'm not going to go into it here. If people want to hear what happened, I've got a story. It's on my website, jagannath.com, the story and me narrating that. But essentially what happened is after a lot of discussion, a lot of emotion, and a lot of hair pulling, I just got on top of the Roth cart. Jayananda said he'd be happy to let me try doing it, but I had on two conditions. One was I couldn't bother him, and I couldn't take any of his people. So the thing is I had to corral people. Fortunately, people were coming from all over the East Coast to the parade. And so I got a couple of people to stay up, and we ended up staying up to about 2 o'clock in the morning and gluing and taping and rebuilding stuff. And somehow or another, we actually got that cart back into the parade very early at that day. So these kind of things really got Tamal to not want to let me go anywhere, even though he knew he owed me a service in India. And so the next thing he asked me to do was send me to Harrisburg. And Vaikuntha Dev's there. He knows, he was the milk truck driver back and forth to Harrisburg. Harrisburg was Harrisburg was sort of a satellite from the Gita Nagari temple. He would drive to the Gita Nagari temple to get the produce and the milk. Gita Nagari was a very promising alternative to, or I should say, a competitive of New Vrindavan. And in fact, it was even more so than I think people realize, because at one point, Tamal Krishna Maharaj specifically asked me to go with him in a van to drive all the way from New York to New Vrindavan. And while we were on the trip, he was specifically coaching me and saying, I want you to be my guy, and I want New Vrindavan. I want to make Gita Nagari even better and more wonderful and more talked about than New Vrindavan. And I think a lot of people are aware of the fact that New Vrindavan had this sort of rocky history of things going on there that, no, we don't need to go into details now. But he specifically wanted to set up Gita Nagari to be sort of like the ideal Vedic perfect village, like Sturbridge Village, which is a sample in New York of an old Plymouth, an old settlers or pilgrim town, I believe it is. So anyhow, so we went on that trip. It was kind of cute. I was such a young devotee and didn't know anything about Krishna consciousness that he, of course, Tamal had all this wonderful milk sweets and things that he got from the pujaris for the trip. And so while we were going, he was giving me a piece of burfi. And as I think many know, the burfi had this very nice paper, very flaky aluminum film, not aluminum, silver film on top of the burfi. So he handed me the burfi, and so I start trying to pull the silver off like I'm thinking it's aluminum foil or something. And he's looking at me like I'm an idiot. And he says, "What are you doing?" And I said, "I don't want to eat the aluminum foil." He says, "That's not aluminum foil, that's silver. You want to eat that too, So I had a lot of nice exchanges like that. At one point, Tamal Krishna Maharaj had specifically asked me to or I should say, actually, Tamal Krishna Maharaj inquired from Dristadumya. I did a lot of work with Dristadumya. Dristadumya, I think a lot of people would say, was kind of like almost Tamal's shadow in those days. And so I had a lot of connection through Dristadumya to Tamal Krishna Maharaj. And I think at one point, Tamal Krishna Maharaj is asking Dristadumya, Tamal Krishna Maharaj had a lot of people back then had their own like verse books and ways to quote and remember things and study books and things like this. So he had one too. And I think the 6th canto had just come out with Ajamil or something. And he wanted somebody to like print very carefully and very neatly, almost, because back then we didn't have computers and auto typers and stuff like we have now. So he wanted somebody to print very neatly into his notebook all of the verses he wanted to memorize from the 6th canto. And I guess I got selected for that because I guess I had a good handwriting. So anyhow, I had a lot of really wonderful opportunities to work with Tamal, but they eventually got down to, you know, I just had to start really making a lot of noise and saying, look, you know, I want to go to India. I want to go to India. I want to go to India. And I guess finally he realized that at some point, I think I actually wrote him a letter and kind of in my own brazen way, kind of challenged him a little bit and said, hey, you guys are supposed to be Brahmins. Your words are supposed to be, you know, truth. And you can't, you gave me your word and you got it. Now you got to come through with the goods here. I want to go to India. So finally, he agreed and they set me up. And I was originally supposed to go to Mumbai or Bombay in those days. But Tamal Krishna Maharaj was having, Bombay was just opening. It was, I think, 1976. It was in December, I think December 1976. And he was having friction with Tamal, with Sarabi Swami. And it got to the point where Tamal had to leave Bombay. And his attitude was, we're not sending Maheshwar to Bombay. No way I'm doing that. We're sending him to Mayapur. So literally, like within 2 or 3 days after I was ready to get on the plane, I was completely rerouted from Bombay to Mayapur. And so I went to Mayapur, and then my participation in Mayapur, when they found out that I had originally built the Rath carts with Jayananda and then rebuilt them again in 1977, which is a whole nother story. Because back in those days, what we had to do in New York, because New York, you don't have space to just park a Roth cart on the street someplace. We literally had to take the whole thing apart, every single beam, everything. And then we pushed it all into the New York garage, and then somebody had to put it all back together the next year. So I did that. And so when we got to, when I got to Calcutta, the word got out that I knew how to build Roth carts. So I built the first big, they had Roth carts before in Calcutta, but I did the really first big one that they had in 1978, I think it was. There was a whole story that goes beyond that. That story is on the Calcutta website if anybody wants to see it. We had some serious problems the first time around. A whole interesting story there too, because I was used to New York, you know. We had a lot of people when Prabhupada came, but when I went to Calcutta, people were telling me, you don't realize how many people are going to show up for this. And I'm going, yeah, I know. I've done Rath Yatra before, no big deal. And they said, no, you don't realize you're in Calcutta, you're just north of Orissa. The Bengalis that's their whole culture. There's going to be over 1 million people here. And I said, yeah, sure. You know, I thought everybody was just trying to encourage me. And sure enough, you know, the Roth cart made it over to the temple in the morning, fine. But by the time the parade started at whatever it was, 10, 11 o'clock or 12 o'clock, something like that, it was insane. I mean, it was just completely insane. You couldn't even get through the temple room. I mean, you literally had to kind of like go like this to get people out of the way. And of course, everybody, including the police and Jayapataka Swami and Satchidananda Swami and all the big shots were there. And everybody was looking at me, you know, okay, how are we going to do this? And I'm going, look, I just built the cart. I don't know how to hold the whole festival. And so, and then keep in mind, there's Bengali, there's Orissan, there's Hindi, there's all these different dialects going on. And we got up in front of the cart and it was kind of like, okay. And back in those days, the way Jayananda built Roth carts were, they used like these kind of parallel bars that were tied into the steering thing. You can see a very nice picture that Vishanta took on the Back to Godhead cover of 19, whatever it is, of the 76 parade. And you literally walk in front of the cart and you just sort of lean into these bars and it moves the steering, and that's how you steer it. But the problem was in Calcutta, you know, the whole city of Calcutta was there. There was no room for anybody to practically stand in front of the cart. It was just the same way the temple was, like this. And, you know, every Bengal and every young, you know, young age Bengali was an expert on Rath Yatra, and they wanted to drive it. And I was just overwhelmed. I just couldn't, I didn't know what to do. And so at some point, the police were saying, when are you going to get this parade going? And Jai Patak is leaning down. He said, when are you going to get this parade going? I said, oh, well, okay, let's do it. And the cart just literally leaped forward with so much energy, and the wheels just kind of came down and crammed into, it was a very high curb on the right side. And the wheels kind of crammed into the curb, immediately came to a dead stop. And because there was so much thrust, they literally just twisted the whole axle to the point where it was like one of those old broken, you know, shopping carts in your grocery store. And there's no way that cart was going to go another foot. And that was within the first 10 feet of the parade. So anyhow, there's a whole story about that, which was my, you know, my trial by fire building Roth carts. But I want to say one more thing here. I want to say two things here real quick, so before I use up all my time. One of them is a little bit of a sensitive issue, but I feel responsible to say this, especially because there's so many devotees, disciples of Tamal Krishna Maharaj in the Houston temple. And again, apologize for the awkwardness of this, but we all know there's been some very ugly rumors spread around. And it really, really bothered me. And I knew all the players regarding these rumors. So in 2020, I actually released the book Deception, which I'm just showing here so people can be familiar with it. I don't know if it's going to see it on the camera. Anyhow, the camera's not picking it up. But anyhow, I released the book Deception, and I released the movie Deception, which vindicated all of the accused devotees of this horrible rumor that somebody poisoned Srila Prabhupada. I don't want to elaborate on it, but I do want to let everybody know there is a tremendous, this is a 500-page book with court-worthy evidence that thoroughly proves there's no way in the world that that could have ever happened. And I wanted to get that out of the way before I say something, which is really kind of my last exchange with Tamal Krishna Maharaj, which came 1995. So I had gone to India, came back to India, from India, worked with the legal department, eventually took on a householder situation, got a professional career working for the Department of Defense at the Port Hueneme Navy Surface Warfare Center as a database engineer, which is how I funded my lifestyle, and always worked very much in parallel with what ISKCON was doing, always trying to step in and encourage, was very heavily involved in rebuilding and designing all of the what I think are probably the most sophisticated Roth carts in our movement, which are the 3 huge LA Roth carts that are made out of aluminum. And all 3 of them are actually go into one 53-foot tractor trailer truck and can be moved anywhere. And there's a whole long kind of interesting stories surrounding that. But by 1995, I think most of us know, Tamal had run into some issues because Radha Damodar, as we know, I was one of the rare few they actually pulled out of college, which was interesting too, because when they took me out of college, Tamal Jumi kept on making phone calls like, yeah, we got him from college. You know, I'm going like, you know, I started making me think, well, what's that mean? I mean, how weird is that? You know, I felt like a pariah almost, you know, but anyhow, a lot of the people came from the temples. Some of the other devotees were talking about that earlier. And this really did not go well with the temple presidents, who were losing manpower and created a lot of friction, which eventually led to the whole kind of slip of the tongue where Tamal said, I might as well preach in China, which is eventually what Prabhupada actually asked him to do. And so he's about 1995, he was kind of in this transition. He was sort of slapped down by the GBC. Hridayananda Swami was in Santa Barbara, which is about 45 minutes from here. And apparently Tamal Krishna Maharaj was up there, and he was sort of like really withdrawn and kind of figuring out, what am I going to do? Trying to figure out how he was going to go to China. He actually was asking me about, because I was in the computer engineering world, he was asking me about software and ways. Back then, things like Zoom and Skype and computer technology wasn't anywhere nearly as developed as it is today. So he was asking for, suggestions of how he could maybe leverage the computer technology so he could he wanted to set up like what do they call it? Units, cells, individual cells in China, because of the communist country. They didn't want to have a problem with too many people gathering at once, and then the government, communist country, would come down and smash everything. So he wanted to have little cells of maybe 5 to 10 people. And then as the cells grew, then they would break into other cells, which is kind of the way you do subversive preaching in a communist country. And so I talked with him about that. And then I was doing programs here at home. And then Radha Damodara called me up one day and he said, Maheshwar, you got to call Tamal Krishna Maharaj and invite him to preach at your house. And I was like, no, that doesn't work like that. He's the big Swami and I'm just some little guy that ran around on Radha Damodar for a while and did a few things here and there, but he doesn't take orders from me. It's the other way around. And Radha Damodara literally called me 3 times and he said, Maheshwar, I'm telling you, you have to do this. You have to call Tamal. And he was explaining to me that he was really kind of like, I don't want to make it over dramatize it, but he was very frustrated because, we all know, and so many people have very correctly pointed out that Tamal was so capable in so many ways that, here's this really powerful guy and he's sort of sitting there in Santa Barbara with his wings clipped and he really doesn't know which way to go. And China hasn't really opened up yet. And he's trying to figure out what to do. And he just needed to get on the Vyasasan and preach because that's where his strength was. And so finally he convinced me and I was kind of a little bit nervous about it. I said, okay, I'll call him up. So I called him up on the phone and kind of said, hey, Tamal Krishna Maharaj, is that you? He said, yes, Maheshwar. And I said, oh, please send my obeisances. And he said, and I said, well, I'm wondering, I have my little kind of like what do you call it? Nam Hatha program going on here in Ojai. We get 15, 20 people, maybe on a good night, we get 25 or 30. He's used to preaching to thousands, and I'm thinking, why the heck would he want to come? And by the way, my backyard is where the Roth cart's sitting behind me in the photo. So that's where we had the people come and sit at the time. And, I was just it was very awkward. And so I finally kind of muttered it out. I said, well, maybe would you be willing to come and kind of speak at my program? And it was just very, reassuring. He said, Maheshwar, I would be honored to come speak at your program at Ojai. And I was like, wow, okay, that's good. Now we got to work out the details, So sure enough, we figured all out. Okay, this time, this date, blah, 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 blah. But here's what I'd kind of like to end on and give respect for everybody else to ask questions if they like, is when he drove up, he came down with Radha Damodara Goswami. And when he got out of the car, of course, I was there to greet him with a garland or whatever at the time. And he walks up to me and I go to him, Hare Krishna Maharaj. And the first thing he says to me is, Maheshwar, how can I serve you? And I was like, and I laughed and I just sort of laughed. I said, isn't this a little awkward? I said, I'm supposed to be asking you that. And he said, no. He says, I'm asking you that. And so I showed him where he was going to speak. And I brought him in, gave him some refreshments. He got here a little early, put him on the Vyasa. And we had about 100 people here that night because at the time, my advertising campaign, it was a whole different world in 1995. I think people realize that things have changed quite dramatically in the last 20 years. Preaching is getting more and more difficult, and Ojai has every New Age organization in the world here. And I've talked about that many times. I'm not going to get into it now, but we had about 100 people here, and he was on fire. And I think I still have an audio tape of what he said that night. And you could just see people were like, whoa, they were just like, who is this guy? I've never heard anything like this before in my life. And so finally he left. We had a big feast. And I have to tell you that I had people in my living room till 5 o'clock in the morning. The sun was coming up, who were still wanting to know more about Krishna consciousness and what happened and where can they see him again? Where will they be able to hear from him again? This kind of stuff. So, it's very sad, unfortunately, that there are some people, I like to say that Krishna is so extraordinary. We say Krishna is all attractive. He attracts everybody. Unfortunately, he also attracts some very strange and maybe disturbed people. And they also come to Christian consciousness, and they cannot help but be who they are. And so this, I believe, and I think to a certain extent, maybe in some very strange way, Christians arranged this to distract them so they can all kind of get dragged off into these other, what I call the ISKCON basher groups, and do their thing over there, because they're really not helping anything that Lord Chaitanya wants to have go down. But the fact of the matter is that, yeah, Tamal could be a little bit of a controversial person from here to there. And yeah, he did sometimes do things that were very controversial and probably upset a few people. But I think it's pretty well agreed upon by the people like myself who had an opportunity to really kind of walk side by side with him through his journey until he passed away in 2003 or whatever it was. That he went through his own transitions, and he also really, I mean, he always had a very sweet side, but I think he really became even more and more sensitive and aware and appreciative and complimentary and cooperative as he matured, just like all the rest of us do. So that's kind of what I'd like to leave this with. I don't think I have any other things I'd like to bring up, but I might think of some more along the way here. They're just little vignettes, like when I was driving the Radha Damodara van from LA back to New York, we went through Texas. This is my big thrilling story. And we were taught on Radha Damodara to never say, take no for an answer. Somebody said they don't have any money. You say, no, look in your glove compartment. I bet you have some there. Well, because we were doing parking lots, Kmart parking lots. And they'd say, well, I just don't have any money. I said, well, look in your glove, look in your ashtray, look in your pockets. Tell you what, we'll take whatever change you got. And I actually, at one point, we were giving away the big, huge, brand new printed Krishna books that had just come off the press for pocket change, because we paid, because when I joined, I gave a lot of money, so all the books are paid for. So we were told, just get whatever you can and push the books out. But we were told never to take no for an answer. So I was in Texas in some parking lot and doing my very awkward and unpolished presentation for selling books, and walked up to some big Texas guys sitting in a huge truck. They had a shotgun in the window of the back of the truck. And I went walking up and knocked on the door, and the guy kind of turns around and he says, what do you want? And I said, I'm just doing incense, sticking an incense in. I'm just doing incense and trying to. And the guy looks at me, he says, we don't want your damn incense and we don't want your damn books. And I said, well, I know it's probably a little unusual, because, by the way, also I think people realize that back in the days when Spiritual Sky produced incense was not really well known in the United States. It was really just starting to become something that people were beginning exposed to. Now every New Age movement, everybody in the New Age knows all about it. But back then, Spiritual Sky really kind of broke the doors down for incense in the United States. So it was weird, and you had to explain it to people. And Brigapati was saying it's some kind of an insect chaser or something like that. We had all sorts of things to explain it. But these guys were in big 20-gallon caps, and they're sitting there drinking their beer. And I'm being, hi, how are you? Hare Krishna. Hi, you want some incense? You want a book? And the guy, and don't take no for an answer, right? And so the guy's looking at me and he's saying, I told you, kid, I don't want your books, and we don't want you here. You get what I say? And I'm going, well, I know it's very strange and awkward. And, I haven't met you before. And, I did whatever silly routine I could do at the time, and was pulling stuff out of my book bag. And the next time I looked up, the guy had a revolver facing me right like 3 inches away from my nose. And he said, I told you I don't want to hear from you anymore. You understand what I'm saying? And I kind of went, ooh, yeah, I think I do very much. Have a nice day. And I just turned around and walked away. So that's my big thrilling story on Radha Damodara Sankirtan. And I'll end there. And thank you all for being so patient and listening. And this is a great reunion.
Thank you so much, Prabhu. That was really great. And Brigapati Prabhu, you wanted to say something?
Yeah. Well, first I'd like to thank Marshwa. He's an amazing speaker, and I know that if he was able to, he could probably continue on for hours, and it would be just as interesting as the last half hour was. He's got so many interesting stories. But I just wanted to say thank you to Vaikanas Maharaj, who I haven't seen except for maybe 2 seconds 25 years ago, in 48 years, because I knew him as Janardhan Prabhu, and he was my first, more or less, Bhakta leader when I first joined. He was in charge of the Harinam party that went out every day from the Henry Street Temple in Brooklyn. And he really helped me a lot when I was a brand new person in the temple. I was extremely spaced out and, weird, and I'm still weird, but thanks to him, I'm a lot less spaced out. He really lovingly pushed me, to get over a lot of different obstacles, and he just really helped me a lot. So I'm seeing him here now. I didn't recognize him at first because it was a different name, and but when he started speaking with Kalki, I realized, oh, there he is. So anyway, thank you, Prabhu. I really appreciate your help there, and thank you very much. Hare Krishna.
I remember one of these parties we went out, we were in Central Park, and we had a chanting line, and you were in it. And some guy came up to me and said, this guy's so skinny. And I said, what are you talking about? So skinny. And then I looked over and that's Brigupati, young Brigupati. He's still skinny, but then thin as a rail. Romapad was there, and a couple of other really tall. Until that point, I'd never even thought about it. Yeah, we're pretty austere, pretty skinny, but that was a Brigupati story. I remember you very fondly from Brooklyn and all our times there, and then sort of meshing and overlapping a little bit in Radha Damodar. And then last I knew of you, you were in the LA airport still after many, 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 many years. So it's really wonderful to hear you speaking today. And I'm very happy. I'm just thinking what Kalki was saying. When Kalki Prabhu was saying that the lasting bondships, the bonds of friendship that we developed under this trial of fire, this sacrifice and joining for this magnificent cause, these are relationships that we'll take with us, not only now, but life after life. I'm really glad to see you again. And Kalki. And is that Bahushra over there in the corner? Who's that? Chad. That's Bahushra, right? Yeah. Yeah, he's another Brooklyn guy. And Sarvapama, who I didn't get to talk to when he was speaking because my internet's coming in and out. I'm kind of in the panhandle of Texas, and I don't have much connection. But it was really good to see you all. Yeah, Bahushra.
Jai Har Bol Maharaj, Janava Pranam, Gos Prabhupada. Jai Jai.
When we went there, you and me were the roof of the hall, and it was an extraordinary night. Just, because Vrindavan wasn't developed, there was no lights, and so we had this sky that was just a sky full of diamonds. And we looked up and we were saying, when we're in America, we're seeing these things like stars, and we were describing it from a scientific paradigm. But when I'm looking up here, I'm seeing the planet of Lord Indra, the planets of the sages. It's completely different. We're really in a different place, aren't we? And it was a really wonderful moment with you. I'm remembering it still.
Jai Har Bol Maharaj.
Hari Bol. And I was appreciative of Maheshwar because I never really knew him. It's really wonderful to get these background stories. Like a couple of weeks ago, we're getting the same thing from Vaikuntha Dev. And, your Wrong Way Go Cool story, Wrong Way Go Cool was in my van party for many, many years and then became my bus driver. And we didn't know about dyslexia back then. And he became a very good friend, lifelong friend, even to this day. He's actually quite a genius. Like many with dyslexia, he had this amazing capacity for memorizing. He knew the whole Vishnu Sahasranam, so many things. But driver and mechanic, well, he was challenged.
He used to call me son. And that
Right.
got under my skin.
Everybody's son.
Yeah, he was like, well, that's just the way it's done, son. And I was like, well, if you want to strip all the gears, I suppose. But yeah, I was
I
not.
remember being with a bus broken down and he'd open up the back and just stare at it.
Oh,
Hammer and whack it. Now whack it again. Just a sense of hopelessness and despair, you know.
everybody
Tough
has
job
their,
being the bus driver and mechanic.
it really was, because those buses were extra challenging. They had over 1 million miles on them, some of them. And, you know, everybody has their particular form of genius. And, you know, he was a genius, but he wasn't a genius with mechanics and
No,
driving. So
not his forte.
anyway, fortunately, I had a little natural ability. It was Giridhari Das at the time who really got me oriented as a driver. And
Yep.
but I had a question for Brigupati. Prabhu, you had mentioned that you were in Louisville when Sura was there, and I was there when Sura was there. I was actually the third devotee to go there off of Tripurari's bus. We were in Cincinnati at the time. And were you there when we were having this kind of, I'm just going to, for want of a better phrase, reign of terror during the morning breakfasts, Havi Shah period, when he would go off on these tirades. And I was just wondering if you were there during that period.
No, I wasn't actually in Louisville. I just remember hearing about that from Sura, I guess.
Okay.
'Cause
Well, yeah, I was there when Srila Tamal Krishna Maharaj called, and for 10 straight minutes, all he said was, but Maharaj, because Anudama Prabhu had recorded him and sent that tape to him. I also have another story about Sura and in Louisville, and we were forbidden from getting butter or any kind of seasonings. And for a while, Mahamantra Prabhu, he came and he was our cook, because they must have been petitioning because I was the previous cook and I was awful. So he was quite a good cook. But one night, actually, he was late coming back from Sankirtan, and Sura was just furious with him. And it came out that he was so late coming back because he had gone to buy some butter. And at first, we only had a picture of the Panchatattva. And I remember going out in the freezing cold, and there was no flour to offer. So I broke off a twig. It was just a twig from a pine tree, and just offered that because that was basically all we had. It was just three of us. It was Dhruva, Das, and Bhakta Mike and myself. But when Sura came and then Mahamantra came, you know, we started filling out as a preaching center, and everybody appreciated that. I mean, he was only cooking that. And then we got deities. So Sura was so inflamed with Mahamantra being so late coming back from Sankirtan that at one point, and it was when he found out it was to get butter, he shoved Mahamantra and he broke the window, and had it not been for the screen that was there, he would have fallen out of a second-story window. And this got around really quick. We heard the commotion upstairs, but we didn't know what had happened. And then, but we all heard that he probably would have gone back to Godhead if he fell, because as he was falling, he was saying that the butter was for the deities. So, and eventually, and then shortly after that, is when Tamal Krishna Maharaj called, and Sura was off the scene. So, and normality.
He may have come up to St. Louis then. 'Cause I
Sura?
was in St. Louis,
Yeah.
and all of a sudden Sura shows up, and my first connection with Sura was him storming into the office. He starts yelling at me at the top of his lungs. But I'd done my apprenticeship under Tamal Krishna Goswami. I'd been on his bus at a number of different times. Whenever there was a big marathon or something, he'd call us in. And, you know, every day for like 6 weeks, we had this morning ritual where after class, he'd stand and yell at me in front of everybody and just break me down, humiliate me. Turn the man up, you know, do your job. And then I do that. So Sir yelling at me was like kind of like a mosquito on an elephant. And I knew the tactics, you know. So I said, who do you think you are? You can't come in here.
We were New York boys. We were from New York.
And he went,
Yeah.
and he became very mellow. And we became friends.
Yeah.
Never yelled again. We became confident and very friendly together.
Yeah. Well, there are so many stories. And when I saw his Prabhupada memory tape service, I said, you know, it was so much bluster, but how could I be mad at somebody who loves Srila
Right.
Prabhupada so much?
Right.
Because it was moving. It was actually very moving to see his love for Srila Prabhupada. So he was, again, we were just so much in the mode of passion in those days. It was, we were just passionately wanting to serve Srila Prabhupada. And that, I think, is also one of the things that that Tamal Krishna Maharaj brought to it. And he inspired everybody. I mean, every one of the lectures he gave at 55th Street, and I used to look forward to them like anything, where, it was Bhagavatam verses. We would do Bhagavatam classes, but they always became like Sankirtan pep rallies, and all the devotees were like cheering at the Haribol, it's like get the book bags, run out the door. He really could fire up the troops, and so I so appreciated that about him, because I had none of that, and it was something I could look at. And of course, I knew that I could take shelter of him. He was that type of person that, even though he had that, if somebody came to him with real problems, he could always accommodate that person in a very skillful way. So I was a problem child. So he made me appreciate that about him. So thank you.
I have a comment to make about Suridas. I spent a lot of time with Suridas over the years. I traveled with him for a few months in a van, him and me and Gyapika, like, every day. Plus, I was with him at O'Hare and in St. Louis when he was the president there. I was the president in Chicago. But when we were traveling in this van, going to all the different temples, I realized that in Suridas's mind, when he was like screaming at people, which he did pretty frequently, he was actually just like kind of talking intensely or seriously in his mind. But in everybody else's mind, they were getting blown out.
I'm really surprised to hear you say that. I mean, because Gyapika was when I was bus driver for Gopi Janaballabha Prabhu, Gyapika was our pujari.
Yeah.
And I was definitely the most passionate one between Mahadev and the three of us. I mean, and he was so sensitive. And I could make him cry. And I just remember, so to hear that he endured that must have been before. What year was that you said you were around St. Louis?
I don't know what year it was,
Yeah. But it must have been before 77, I'm guessing. Because Gyapika was on our bus in the summer of 77.
It was like right before all the buses were retired, I think.
Oh, so it might have been
right after. Yeah.
Yeah.
Might have been right after. But once I realized that about Suridas, he would start yelling at me, which, you know, he did as much as he would to anybody. I would just like blow it off and talk to him like, yeah, sure. Or, you know, and it just, you know, it didn't bother me after that, because I just realized like the guy doesn't know what he's doing.
Well, he was challenging for me because I was not raised with
Challenging
that.
for a lot of people.
Yeah. And I didn't take to confrontation particularly well.
Yeah.
So, but
Well, I didn't for a while, but I did have this realization, and so I stopped, you know, really blaming him.
yeah.
And he
Yeah,
also
like-
had a very
Awesome.
sweet side. He
Oh.
was funny and engaging and really nice. I think the sign of our maturity is that, you know, when you're young, it's like sharp rocks in a bag, right? And we're all in this little bag of a van or a bus or a temple, and we're just poking each other. But that poking and movement gradually smooths everything
Smooths out the
out.
roads. Yeah.
And in our dotage, you know, now you can just look back and appreciate all these wonderful qualities and the incredible dedication and sacrifice these people made. I mean, you just bow down when I hear these stories. Can't talk about something a little bit ago. I still want to talk. Oh, he's maybe not there. I don't know. Ashwar?
Yeah, I just wanted to share something really quick about Jyapika, because when I went to Vrindavan and got initiated in 1976 at that big initiation, shortly thereafter, I actually caught a case of malaria, and I didn't realize what it was. And with the usual Radha Damodara insanity, which you never stop and you always show up at Mangal Artik, and whatever happens, there's no excuse, you go out, that kind of a thing. I just blew it off, and I literally blew it off for about 3 or 4 days. And finally, with a couple of days later, they finally got us on the plane. We flew out of Delhi to come back home. I was sick as a dog. The devotees were very kind. They made a way, like the ocean partying, the Red Sea partying. I found my chair. I basically was blacked out for the entire flight back to New York. Got to New York on the 6th floor where I had my room. Just sat there, barely crawled down because you couldn't miss Mangal Artik. So I got up, did Mangal Artik every day. And one day, I literally was on my hands and knees crawling from the back of the New York temple door to the elevator to go back up to my room. And Jyapika was chanting his rounds at the front counter, you know, the reception counter to the whole temple. And he looked at me and he said, "Prabhu, you look like really sick." And I was like, "Yeah, well, duh, I can barely stand up." And he said, "Are you aware of the fact that there's about 10 or 15 devotees who've gone to Roosevelt Hospital, and they've all gotten treated for, you know, dysentery and this, that, and the other thing, jaundice?" And I didn't know. I just didn't know. And he said, "I think you better go to the hospital." And so I waited till 7 o'clock when Romapad's office opened, crawled my way into there, asked for the $7 you needed to go to the outpatient clinic at Roosevelt Hospital, and somehow made my way up the 4 or 5 blocks to where the hospital was, went in there. The nurse put a thermometer under my tongue, and apparently I found out the next day, because they wouldn't tell me then, I had 107-degree temperature and I was nearly dead. And I actually lost my vision while I was standing on line waiting to pay the $7. And there's a whole, you know, it was like the whole fire chain. Doctors were rushing me around on a gurney and everything. So the reason why I'm saying that is because Jyapika actually saved my life. If he did not say anything, I would not be here today. So I wanted to acknowledge that. I also wanted to just share it's a very little sort of an innocent vignette. When I dropped out of school and joined Radha Damodar, everybody was going around saying, "Yeah, you got the sauce. Yeah, you got the sauce." And, you know, I think everybody knows what that means now, but I didn't know what it was. I was just from school. I didn't know what, just some kind of Hare Krishna lingo, you know?
Yeah.
And, but apparently that began, I don't know where it began, but it was all over the Radha Damodar party. And, I just wanted to add those little vignettes. And I also want to say very welcome Rajendranath, my computer guru who just joined us, who was very, 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 very instrumental in Radha Damodar, and was like kind of the guy in the brains behind the office that was shipping all the books out and coordinating all the trucks. And and coordinating everything. So thank you very much for joining us, Rajendranath. We hope you'll join us and actually have your own opportunity to speak. And I encourage the coordinators of this to get a hold of him and get him to speak, because he knows a lot about Tamal Krishna Maharaj too. He did a lot with him. So Hare Krishna.
Yes, we will do that. But maybe he might say something now while he's here with us. But definitely we'll get him on and speak as well. Thank you so very much. Rajendranath Prabhu, you want to say something?
What do you want to know?
Anything you like to say. Your choice.
Give him a chance to see what goes on. You put him on a spot a little bit, I think.
Okay. Oh,
Prabhu's, I've got to run. I've got other stuff and it's getting late here, but I'll be there for the next one. Thank you very, very much.
The next one's going to be on May the 7th at the same time, 7 Central.
I'm in Central Time,
Yes.
but
Yeah.
yeah, old body, got to get up early in the morning. It's
Right.
getting late.
So it'll be Saturday, May the 7th, just for everybody's information. We were supposed to go till 9 o'clock and it's 9 o'clock now. Just letting everybody know before people bail out. Thank you very much, Bikanas Maharaj, for joining us. Thank you.
Jai Vakanath Maharaj.
Jai. All right, well, thank you very much, everybody. I think we'll part
It's gonna go right now.
here, and we're coming back on again at 7 o'clock on the 7th of May, which is a Saturday.
okay. Wow. I have a question, because the Zoom came up and it says 7 o'clock, but it looks like you guys are ending. I don't think I got the right time.
7 o'clock Central, which is 5.
Oh,
Yeah, that was probably my error, and I apologize for it. It didn't occur to me that they're broadcasting out of Dallas and I'm in California. And you're in California, so we're both like 2 hours ahead. So it really started at 5 o'clock.
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't realize that. I would have loved to have been here for the whole thing.
All
All right, well, you'll
Oh.
get your chance. You'll get a chance.
Rajendranath Prabhu, please come back.
Yes.
I mean, just to,
Yes, please.
I,
Give you quality time. That'll be your own time.
I just want to say one thing. Well, I could talk for a long time about.
So could I.
In a good way. In a
Both
good way.
ways, yes.
And, but you were always so considerate to me. And, I came out to California in 1980 and I didn't know whether to turn left or right, that kind of thing. But I did know that you were here. And I came to see you in Venice, or not Venice, but on Venice Boulevard. You were living right there. And you got me a job the first day I showed up. You made a phone call, I had an appointment, and then I had a job with Matilides Prabhu.
Hey, you were the guy that got me into driving motorcycles again.
Well, they did call me Bhakta Motorcycle Bob in New York, so
Yeah, Motorcycle Bob, yeah.
that was me. And for better or for worse. And I also contributed to that altar that Maheshwar built by roaring up the West Side Highway, splitting lanes on a motorcycle to get this thing we needed before the weekend, 100 pounds of fixative or something insane, and strap that on the bike. But you were so dear to me, and I know you were dear to a lot of devotees, and you were dear to Tamal Krishna Maharaj. So I think this would be a wonderful, wonderful way to, inspire his devotees who are on this call, and me.
So what we're saying is next Saturday, it's at 5 o'clock my time, not 7 o'clock my time.
Correct.
Okay, I will try to remember that.
Thank you so very much. All right, so we'll bring this to a close. Vanchakalpa Tribhischa.
Patitanam Bhavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo
Thank you all
Namaha.
so very much. Thank you all so very much. This is priceless, totally priceless.
All
Ananta
glory to these
Krishna
people.
Vrinda Ki Jai.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Thank you. Thank you.